Okay, here we go. Hey everyone, I'm Ruby Rose Fox with Muscle Music, and we are here to help performers and artists with their mental health. And I am here today with HAILEY MAGEE, who is a friend from Boston, who's now in the Pacific Northwest, and we are here to talk about her work and how it relates to artists and mental health. Yeah, hi HAILEY.
Hi. Excited.
I'm so excited too.
Uh, this is such an important conversation.
I know. I know. And I feel like we've overlapped so many times, and you brought me into your circle once to do a stage fright workshop, and um, yeah, sort of circled around each other in so many ways. So it's fun to just get to talk.
Yeah, agreed. I know it's cool how so much of this stuff overlaps, right? Whether it's like performance and music and mental health and like wellness body stuff, like there's a lot of overlap there for sure.
So, how would you define your title in terms of your boundary people pleasing work? Um,
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of funny. So technically, my title is that I'm a codependency recovery coach.
okay.
Um, yeah, I'm like a certified coach, and I that area of focus is like codependency, people pleasing, and difficulty setting boundaries.
Totally, which is amazing.
Uh,
And you're a singer-songwriter.
yes,
Yes.
on the side, yeah, I know. It's like I
Yeah.
forget some. Oh, there's that too. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Um, so, and where can people find you online?
The best place is probably Instagram.
Yeah,
HAILEY Page MAGEE. But then there's my website, HAILEY MAGEE, which offers like a deep dive into all the things. So either of those are good spots.
yeah. I was looking at your website, and you have so many cool programs for people pleasers and people with boundary issues, and it's so amazingly specific. And yeah, I wanted to. I was like, this looks fun. I want to do it. So yeah,
It's so funny because I think like in the work, I know, I mean, a lot of this work is personal as it is for so many of us. And I know for me, just like setting boundaries and saying no and feeling like I was allowed to kind of be the protagonist of my own life was something I struggled with for so long. And I also felt really alone in that. I was like looking at all my badass friends, like, saying no, setting boundaries. And I was like, why can't I do that? So now doing this work, it's like anyone who feels that way, it's like totally a global thing. Like people attend my stuff from all over the world and they're like, I thought it was just me. So it's never just you.
yeah. I was even thinking like because I tend to be on the other side of this equation and just like so curious about it just because I have so many people in my life that struggle so much. And even just to have some tools to like help my friends would be
Right.
amazing, because it's
Yep.
so specific.
And it can hard to be it can be hard to be on the other side of the equation too, right? As someone who maybe doesn't struggle, it's like, why aren't they telling me what they need? How come I can't really get to the core of who they are? So it's hard all around.
It's so anxiety producing to be with a person who isn't setting boundaries for themselves because you never know where you are with them.
Exactly. Right. And then you're like, I have no guidebook for how to interact with this person in a
Yeah.
way that makes me feel okay. Yeah.
Right. Which brings up the topic I want to talk about the most today, which is like psychological safety. Um, because I think that's what we're all looking for all the time.
Rock on.
um,
Yeah.
and I wanted to talk to you because I recently had a client that I was working with who is also a drag queen. And we were starting to work with some nervous system states. And so we were going deep into the idea that you can actually play with different nervous system states. And actors do this all the time and don't even realize they're doing it. So their
Mm-hmm.
character may be going into like a shutdown response, or their character may be in fight or flight. And there's parts of your nervous system that just like turn on, like because our bodies are so like sensitive to what we're thinking and what we're doing, that there is a sort of play in that it does feel real. But also there's this space where it's not real and it's safe. And there's
Mhm.
boundaries and there's rules. Um, and I was thinking so much about you and your work and your proximity to BDSM, because I just have this feeling like the protocols that are in BDSM, which I don't know about, could possibly be really helpful for theater, especially theater people. Music is another topic, but
Yes. What a cool overlap. I can totally see that making sense. Yeah. Hmm.
like I was reading, and you sent me a whole bunch of literature to read before, and I was reading, it says in proper BDSM protocol, there's a step called aftercare where partners who participated in a scene together check in one another emotionally, often with cuddling and hugging, talking about how it made them feel, if they're okay now, whether they liked everything that happened, what they didn't like, or any other emotion that came up. And it said, in contrast, people who seek relief from self harm often report feeling negative about themselves and what they've done. And I was like, oh my gosh, that is like exactly what the performing arts needs, is more frameworks, rituals. And there are some rituals, like in theater, there's the warm up, the theater warm up. But yeah. So I wanted to just ask you, first of all, can we just like define what BDSM is? Because I feel like I'm still learning about it, and like people have sometimes really like judgmental or negative feelings about even those letters. So, can
Right?
you define it for us?
Yes, totally. And I love the chance to like unpack because there can be so much stigma around this term. And I feel like there's a huge difference between BDSM and what it is and what people think it is. So these conversations are so helpful. So, all right, bear with me here. So it's an acronym, right? And basically, every two letters um, in BDSM describe a different pairing. So BD could be bondage and discipline. I might say some of this wrong.
Oh,
Bondage
that's
and
okay.
discipline. Then we've got DS, which is dominance and submission, another dynamic. And then we've got S&M, so sadism and masochism. And oftentimes these components of whether it's like bondage, dominance, submission, sadism, masochism all end up in that same kind of like umbrella category, which to me often is used to describe people who engage in consensual power play
Mm-hmm.
in their sexual connections.
Cool.
Yeah. Yep.
And yeah, and so there's like a lot of things at play, but um, why why were you first drawn to it,
Yeah.
and what has it done for you in your life, and how has it changed you as a person?
Yeah. So this is something, so I'm 28, and I think within the last year is the first time in my life where I've really felt comfortable enough to publicly, to a certain extent, identify as like a BDSM practitioner. And for me, what really gets me going in that world is this submissive side. So I think of myself as a sub, and I'm into some of the, bondage pieces too. But to answer your question, yeah. So like for me at least, and everyone feels differently about this, but for me, this has been a part of my identity, my personal and sexual identity since I like came out of the womb. So
Wow.
like ever since my sexuality turned on, puberty and like adolescence, this has always been part of it for me. So like my earliest fantasies, when we're young, we're just starting to have these sexual fantasies, all included some measure of being in a more submissive sexual role to like a dominant partner. And it's so funny because I just thought that was just what excited me. Right. And then as I got older and started, like, as we all do, maybe like hooking up with people or reading about sex or watching porn or whatever, I kind of realized, oh, there's a whole world. There's a whole like subculture within sexuality within which this like power play between dominance and submissiveness is like a thing. And that was really popularized by 50 Shades of Grey recently, which is kind of like, a lot of folks in this community really don't like that book because it doesn't include so many of the important components of kink, which is like aftercare and pre-negotiation and all that. But basically, like, I'll try to stick to your question. But yeah, so this has been part of my sexual identity the whole time I've been a sexual being.
Wow.
And being able to express that as I've gotten older and moved through the stigma and owned it for myself has been like beautiful, because it gives me a chance to access this part of me and really surrender and release control in a safe, pre-negotiated and consensual way with people I really like.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
there's so much in this, and like its relationship to the arts too. Like I have a theater degree, and we did a whole semester on status work, which is all dominant submission. It's the whole thing is that. And we never really talked about the fact that sexuality is so sucked out of our universe, which is why I want to like just go right for it. It's sucked out of therapy. Like you have to
Yep.
find a sex therapist to even talk about sex in therapy. Like what is that? That's
Isn't
crazy.
that bonkers?
It's
And is there anything more
bonkers.
human than like having sexual desire and exploring sexual? Like it's such a fundamental part of humanity. It's wild how divorced it is and how stigmatized it is.
It's a part of our very being. It's insane.
Right.
So anyway, so I've also explored, I'm just realizing now how much I've actually explored these dynamics and how it's so interesting, like in clown work, and in status work when you're working as an actor. It's so amazing to just watch a dynamic unfold on stage of power play between two characters. And
Mm-hmm.
how sometimes the submissive one actually has a lot more power in weird, interesting ways. Um,
For the
and
layman, Peter Layman, can you just, which is me, can you describe status work? Like, what
yeah,
is that when you say?
so it's about consciousness of power in relationship to another character. So, and how you're
Right.
holding your body, and so like what does submissiveness look like in the body? Like what does a character look like who's maybe in a submissive role. But what's interesting is like when you think about the nervous system, and this happens in like, I don't know, I would say in Beckett plays, especially, like the submissive character is all often very like in a safe and social nervous system state. Sometimes not, and usually the dom is. I'm using BDSM language, but the dom is like stressed, and the submissive one is sort of like the comedian, and has power in that way, in that they're someone has power over them, but they have power in themselves. It's really interesting. um
Yeah.
but
Maybe there's like a free, oh, I didn't mean to
oh,
go
go
for it.
ahead, go ahead.
Well, it's just funny you say that because, and I imagine so many ways these fuse. The same is even true, like in the bedroom with these dynamics too. Like there's a misconception that because the dominant oftentimes will control the flow of the interaction, and depending on your dynamic, maybe they give commands or maybe they're physically in charge. There's a misconception that the dom has like 100% ultimate control. But in a sexual sense, in folks who are like practicing it in a safe and healthy way, the sub has the control because they can, they give consent, they say what they're comfortable with and what they're not. They can use safe words that would just like in a moment end the scene. And
Right.
so it's all in this sound, maybe similarly, like this container of safety, um, in which like the sub has just as much control, so to speak, as the dom.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And like from a nervous system perspective, to me, I see this whole thing happening like in our safe and social nervous system, where instead of being triggered into actual fight or flight or a freeze state, you're actually getting triggered into flow states or
Yeah.
meditative states because it's locked inside um, what Pat Ogden would call your window of tolerance. So there may be
Yeah.
some stress, but you don't get triggered into an actual stress state, which
Yeah.
I think is like when I used to like uninitiated, like had no idea what BDSM was. I assumed that it was like about torture or like about actually feeling not good. And it's
Right.
interesting because I think theater deals with this too. Like, do we method act? Or like, do we really feel like shit? Or do we really get raped? Or do we really um, get hit? Or like, what is the right way? And I think, modern, like our theater practices now are way more in the teaching vein of no, we're not actually doing this stuff. We're not, method acting is very dangerous and kind of psychotic in that way, in that like it's unhealthy and not sustainable to be stressing your
Mhm.
system like that.
Right. And
So,
it is interesting. That is so interesting, to think again about the similarities, because within the BDSM space, when you are engaging, let's say I were to engage in like a sexual moment with my dom, it's literally called a scene. That is the
yeah,
terminology.
I just
Nicole, you're
get a
right. It's like
chill.
right. And it's like the overlap is actually incredible because you have a scene, and that scene, perhaps similar to theater, again, requires like pre negotiation. What's not the script, so to speak, but like what is the flow? What's okay? What's not? And what's
Hmm.
wild is that you do say, this is one of the biggest misconceptions about BDSM is like from the outside, it's like, oh, they're being tortured or they're being pushed past their window of tolerance into hyper arousal, hypo arousal. But the truth is that, and this is studied, and some of the stuff I sent you is like, as a sub, because you're in this really incredible space where you feel safe enough to really acquiesce control and let go of all of that micromanagey burden responsibility that we all carry, especially in the 21st century. Like, I end up accessing what's called subspace, and many subs do, which is essentially like the closest thing I can use to describe it is like my mental state feels like this vast blue ocean in which I am just like peacefully submerged. It's
Mm,
like it's exactly like a meditative state. Whereas typically dominants report experiencing something called dom space, which is exactly like you said, more similar to what's known as like a flow state. So almost like a laser focus, high energy, fully present, like embodiment.
right.
And how cool is that, man? I mean, that is just like, what an incredible way to like help your body and mind experience that.
Well, I think that's why people become so drawn to performance. I mean, I know that's why I have like driven myself to become broke many times just to keep my performing career going, because being on stage, you are never so present. Like time slows. You are
Mm,
just in your body 100%. Like it is a feeling of just like complete flow. And there's
yeah.
like nothing better. And I
Yeah.
think I've come to a place in my life where I'm just like, I'm not always going to be there, but it's really refreshing to come back there sometimes. You
Right.
know?
Yeah, maybe like as like a reset or, and
Yeah.
something I'm curious about. I don't know if this is a similarity, but I want to ask
Yeah.
because I know for me, and there's different perspectives on this within the BDSM community. For me, when I'm with my dom and we are engaging in that play, some folks describe it as entering a role, right? So I'm going to step into my sub role.
Hmm.
For me, I personally feel like instead of occupying a role that's separate from me, I'm actually just like peeling back my layers and expressing something that is at my core. Like it doesn't feel like a role I'm playing, it feels like me in an essence of me that is 100% true.
Hmm.
And I'm curious if for folks in theater, maybe just for you, like when you are engaging in roles where you feel that flow or that complete embodiment, do you feel like you're expressing something that is fundamentally you at your core?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and I think because even in music performance, like because of my acting training, I think of myself as a multiplicity. Even before I knew what family systems therapy was and that we have parts,
Yeah.
um, and that parts can actually play and express things they never thought they could express. So, yes, yes. I do always think it's me, a part of myself. Because,
Yeah.
and like if I have a voice client who comes to me that's like, hey, I want to work on a persona. Like, I want to work on making my persona. I'm always like, we need to talk because it's, there is no such thing. It's like, you show up in with the different energies and different playfulnesses. I don't know how to describe it. Different directions, different energies, but you can't change if you're not working from your core. It's not authentic. People can sniff it out. Like when I watch actors who are putting like something over themselves, you can see it in a heartbeat. It's boring. But when someone's coming from their core, there's just this, and it happens with musical performers, it happens with all performers. Like there's just
Yes.
this amazing, you can't keep your eyes off them. You're like, I don't know why, but I just can't. I'm mesmerized by watching a human just sit on stage. Like in acting, it's the most clear because you don't have an instrument. You're not doing a song and dance. Like you don't have any tap shoes, and you're not like, look at me, how
Right.
talented. You can just walk on stage with presence, walking from your core, and have the audience be like, holy, like what's gonna happen? What's gonna happen next? And that is what I think the core of flow states are like. And then you put the audience in a flow state, which is really cool.
Oh my God, right. That next level, that sort of like synergy. Again, oh man, I'm so glad we're talking about this. There's so many overlaps because I'm thinking about when I experience someone who is fully embodied in their dominance or submissive sides, it too is mesmerizing because the presence and the authenticity emanating from that person in that moment is it pulls me right in. And I do feel the need to say, like to anyone listening too, because I hear this a lot too, like in the kink community, folks will often be like, I think I'm interested in dominance or submission, but I'm not sure. Like, how do I get there? And I do think
Mm.
that even if that tendency doesn't necessarily come to you like effortlessly, by accessing that part of you and by giving yourself permission to tune into that little part of you that is intrinsically submissive or dominant, I think we all have these many parts of this kind. You can come to access that side of you and bring it into your sexual play just by accessing that part.
And I,
Yeah.
I love that even in terms of just like the performance of feminism,
Yeah.
of like, I have parts of me that are really masculine and I have parts of me that are really, really hyper femme. And I think what this framework is kind of putting in my mind is just more playfulness about all of it. Like, what if one day I want to get up and just dominate my life? And maybe there's other days where I could just like be a little bit more forgiving about my submission to the universe. Like, I think there's also a spiritual component of this too, of these energies that we're so afraid of because of patriarchy putting us in one category or another.
Mm. The boxes are so restrictive. And it is like, I believe we have all these parts, and our culture and the way we've been socialized has taught us which of these parts are like we're allowed to access and which of them we have to like bury, you know, especially through, I mean, personally, as someone who's identified as a feminist, you know, at least since before college, like I really struggled with my sexuality as it relates to submission, especially, right? Because what does it say about me if I want to be, you know,
Oh
a
yeah.
strong, powerful woman, but then I really want a guy to tie me up and tell me what to do in the bedroom? Like that can cause a huge, and for men and, you know, folks, any gender who feel this way, especially some of the male doms I've interacted with, they felt such guilt about being interested in like dominating women. They're like, am I a creep? Am I a sexual predator? Like, what's wrong with me that I want this? But if you adopt it through the lens of playfulness, like you were saying, Ruby, and like allow yourself to just access these parts.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel similarly about like my childhood fantasies. And I think I'm skeptical of them because I'm like, do I just have some of these submissive feelings in so many different realms, like whether it's character work um, or sexual or otherwise? Like, do I just have them because of the way that I was socially uh, trained by the media, by advertising, by parents, by the church, by, you know,
Right.
um, are are they my desires or are they someone else's desires that were put on me and now I think they're my desires? But the point is, in this realm of play, it makes it okay to actually like do something 100%. And like, I imagine that there may be a point where you're like, I'm bored. Like, I don't want to be sub anymore. I want to try something else. I want to try another energy on. But it lets more like exploration, curiosity, safety, compassion happen in the realm so that it's not so rigid and you can actually explore the questions because I don't think there are answers. I think it's unless you think there are answers.
No, I'm right there with you. No answers. I mean, I can't tell you how many journals and therapy sessions and books I read trying to get to the core of that exact question. Like, do I want this because of trauma? Do I want this because of my upbringing? Do I want this because of patriarchy? And at a certain point, I realized I'm a huge, you know, nurture person. Like, the reason I like apples could be because of my upbringing. The reason I, you know, I mean, anything in our lives can be boiled down to like nurture and nature. And at the end of the day, it's me now. And overthinking it is not going to change it. And it's not harm. I think that's the thing too, is like, it's not harming me. Like my
Totally.
interest in kink and our shared interest in sort of like playing with different roles and characters, I actually think it really benefits my life and enables me to more fully experience these different energies that are natural. And even studies, you know, I mean, I can't cite the exact studies. I have the articles. I can, maybe we can link them or something
Sure.
after, but like so many studies on folks who practice BDSM show that many of us are actually better equipped to have conversations about things like boundaries and consent and whatever, because it's like it's written into the code of this play. We
Hmm.
have to create the safe container that we explore within. And that's awesome.
Right. I think actors do a little bit. I don't know what's happening now. We're working with me and my partner Jennie in Muscle Music are working with some universities right now on trauma informed workshops to transform theater and the arts. Um,
Cool.
but I do think instinctually actors have a lot of body awareness, like proprioception. Like there's a lot of just intelligence in that department, just because that's what theater requires. And I
Right.
think musicians tend to have less, and I think visual artists, have like less and less because their art form is away from their body a little bit. Not always. Dancers, I'm sure, have a lot of this as well. I'd be so interested to hear. I don't know if you know Jared Williams, um, who just opened this amazing dance retreat center, but
Mm-hmm.
called the Field Center. But I'm sure that his dancers have like also need consent and structure and Also, I mean, in the play of movement, there's natural dominant submission stuff too. So
Right.
pushing and pulling, and it happens in like salsa dancing, and I mean, it's everywhere, everywhere.
And it is everywhere. And this is the thing. What could be more natural? I guess that's always my kind of retort when folks talk crap about DS or BDSM too. It's like every relationship of any kind has power. And art forms have power. You know, we're always negotiating power in any dyadic between two or more people, right? Like, who is the power? Who does the labor? Who does this? Who does that? And like, similar to the way skydiving is really fun because we know we're going to be safe, or going on a roller coaster is really fun because we know we're going to experience heightened nervous system states without crashing into the ground. Like, BDSM gives us this permission to explore this very natural power play. And same as theater, the chance to explore a really natural power exchange safely. Mm-hmm. What could be more natural? I mean, this is kind of what I come back to all the time. Like, yeah, it allows you to integrate. That's what it's done for me, you know?
So I think that totally pivots to what I want to talk about so bad, which is like this safety bubble, this construction that we make through ritual, through communication. What are the structures around BDSM that can help other forms of play be safer? So what is the container?
Right. There's so much to learn from this community about this. And I'm not an expert. I'm still learning myself,
Sure.
But here are some things I've found. One thing that I was really surprised by when I started stepping my foot into this community is that folks in the scene often presented me with an epic checklist that served as like a sexual inventory. So imagine like a 10-page PDF that has all these different examples of sex acts. Everything from, you know, being tied to using certain toys to breath play, making out. So basically all of these things you could imagine. And then there were scales, like 1 to 10. Like, how much does this interest you? Is it a total deal breaker, or is it something you're like totally jonesing for? And so oftentimes in the scene, you will kind of fill out your own little sexual inventory and then share it with prospective partners so you can really see where the interests are overlapping and the boundaries exist. I mean, oh my God. Also, the fact that this like boundary process, I mean, it's actually seen as like best practice. Like, if you do not do some of these things, like use the inventory or communicate proactively, you're going to be looked down upon in the community for exactly the reason you said earlier, Ruby. Like, other people won't feel safe to play with you because they won't know what your limits are. Mm-hmm. And that's not safe, right? So there's the inventory. I mean, before you're engaging in a scene, whether it's someone doing rope, someone using toys on you, someone just doing dom sub stuff, you talk about like, what are your hard limits? What are your soft limits? What are things you really want? You negotiate. The word is like, you know, negotiate or pre-negotiate. Mm-hmm. And even someone who is submissive, someone who's really acquiescing control about the scene, they are extra responsible for being very communicative during the negotiation because they have to be.
Yeah. You know? Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm just thinking of the theater and like how many times I was in theater school and our teachers would be like, go with your impulses, go with your impulses. And there were no boundaries. So it's like, you know, there was a time where like someone like threw water over someone's head and they didn't know it was about to happen. And, you know, so many scenes like there could be a kiss. And so many times in class, people would kiss or touch or they usually wouldn't fight because at least in theater, there's a lot of there's a lot of talk about fighting, like stage combat. So, you know, if you are to do combat, then it goes into the stage combat realm and you have to sort of do that. But intimacy direction is brand new, brand new.
Right.
And then they have someone like a consultant come in to work as an intimacy director. But to me, I'm like, what about the responsibility of each and every actor to say, these are my limits? Like a checklist sounds amazing. Can I touch your face? What are parts of your body that are just off limits?
Right.
Can I do a fake hair pull? Do
Oh
you
my
not
God.
want me to touch your body at all? How are we exploring? And how much more fun it would be to come into a space of play knowing exactly like, and then it would be kind of fun because you might realize that you can do things you didn't know you could do. Like,
Right?
oh, I can kiss you. Oh, I can touch your shoulder. You know, like that makes it so kind of even more playful.
Yes, because the boundaries are clear, the container is defined, and then
Yeah.
both parties or all parties can like just live freely within that container instead of second guessing, like, oh, if I touch her shoulder, what will happen with this like insecurity? So much to learn in that. I mean, and also I know, and I think this could also apply to theater as well. Like within that inventory, there are also questions about to the extent like does xyz provoke trauma, do you have any physical or emotional disabilities that prevent certain forms of movement,
Hmm.
right? So if you have a certain injury and you can't do xyz, you really want your dom to know that because god forbid they flog you there, you know what I mean? Like, and all of these things allow for they take like privilege into account, like they work with different identities and different bodies and just
Hmm.
say, okay, let's make this comfortable for you. And I imagine the same can be really helpful in theater.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like when I made my nervous system class for performers, the thing that I was saying the most was that the more you can stay in the safe and social realm, which takes a lot of negotiation and time and effort, actually, the better your performance is. You play more, you expand more. It's actually a more exciting experience. And I think people have this perception that being safe, like even the word safety is like, ugh. Like, why would I want to be safe in my art? Safe is supposed to be dangerous. I'm supposed to tear off my ear. I'm supposed to be miserable and depressed to make the best art. And it's
Right.
like,
Oh,
actually, you're completely closing your window of play.
that's right. Yep. Because that free, exactly. It's like the cornerstone of so many therapies, like, you know, like attachment theory, right? Like we can only truly feel safe and free to explore when there's like a secure base, in this case, within our nervous systems. And that's like, that's what this stuff is all about, you know? And then also, like, when you were asking about the container, these different constructs. So there's like the inventory list, there's the clear pre negotiation for scenes, and then also the aftercare. Um, which is really important because in a scene, and I'll just speak from personal experience, like if I'm doing a scene where I'm like doing impact play, which is a way of describing things like being flogged or being whipped or having paddles, like anything that impacts on you,
Hmm.
it's intense for your body. And I go into it knowing that I want that. It's an incredible rush of endorphins and it's that really sexy mixture of pain and pleasure. Like there's a lot of good stuff. But afterwards, it's extremely common for there to be drop, meaning because
Mm.
I've been in such an elevated state, my whole body, my physical and nervous system kind of drops. And it's normal. It's kind of like the roller coaster. What goes up must go down. But in that space of drop, there are some things I really need. Like I need to be told I'm safe. I need to be held. A lot of folks like to be given water, like have a little massage just to come back. And I really imagine, like you were saying, like having those same protocols in place could be helpful for anyone exploring an intense state,
Hmm. Hmm.
you know?
Um, I'd love to give you an example of something going wrong and then talk about the pre-care and aftercare that could have happened and didn't, like how this could have been remedied in a real life situation. But before I do that, I have a burning question. We are humans, and like not everyone has the same amount of body awareness, and some of us are younger and with less experience in the realm of nervous system regulation. This idea of connection and repair is huge. So that breaking connection is a part of the process, and that the biggest thing is to repair. And when it really goes wrong is when the repair piece is not integrated. So we have connection, but we have broken connection, and then it's never repaired. So, and you don't have to have an answer to this, but what do we do in cases of violation or disconnection? Or what happens when somebody does something on the checklist that they, like, let's say they forgot and they crossed a boundary? What do we do?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I'm trying to think if I can share. I guess, like, so here's the thing, right? Like, also, we're human and we make mistakes. And of course, if someone, we talk about this a lot in just like my boundary coaching work, if someone's repeatedly violating boundaries as a pattern, that's very different from someone stepping over a boundary maybe by mistake. And really, I mean, I think the answer is in the question, which is like, you know, are they open to acknowledging their mistake? Are they willing to talk about it and own it and resolve it with you?
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's only so much you can do. I mean, I think I can put myself in that situation. And I think in my memory, there have been times when my boundaries have been kind of like, boop, like violated a little bit. And there's no right answer. Like perhaps it was to such a degree that I was able and willing to like come back to my body and troubleshoot it with the person and then move on and mend, which can be really healing. But it also depends on the body, right? Like I definitely have some trauma in my past. The vast majority of us do. So if someone pushes a button or violates a boundary and causes like like my body to feel unsafe, I may choose to never re-engage with that person again sexually. And that's completely within my right. And like there's no right answer, I think, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think?
Oh. I'm just thinking of all. There's so much power when in a one-on-one, because you can say in couples or in sexual play, you can say we can't partner again, right?
Right.
But I'm thinking of like theater ensembles and
Mm-hmm.
the
Yeah.
hierarchies that exist in them, and if someone's violating your boundaries in any way, how can I don't have answers for this yet, but I think it's up to the organizations to figure it out. But in hierarchies of power in arts, how do we make sure that people have a way to have a boundary? You know, like if someone's cast, like what do you do?
Mm.
You're in the middle of a theatrical process and something gets violated. How do we repair? And I think what you said is really important. It actually comes down to the willingness to be open, curious, even when triggered. Like I'm feeling like even if the person who crossed the boundary is triggered, just being willing to make the repair is
Yeah.
huge.
Yeah, it's exactly. It just opens up that space. And it's also making me think about the difference. If we're talking about a boundary being violated, there's kind of like two sides to this in my mind. There's like the ideological principle side, the intellectual side that's talking about like, you crossed my boundary. This is what it was, right? The very like linear. But then there's also the body, like my nervous system and my trauma response. And that is a lot less linear and a lot foggier. So
Hmm.
yeah,
Which is
it's
why I think
complicated.
I advocate for nervous system education for everybody, everybody.
Mm.
it, and why intimacy people in theater can be really helpful. But if people don't understand their systems and how they work, like how a shutdown response is different than a fight or flight, how we have parts and about our traumas, then it's a much more dangerous territory than if everybody has done the basic nervous system work to understand how to use language even to communicate what's happening inside you.
Yes. God, we should all be taught this. This is why what you're doing is so important because, like, it also allows us to have more self compassion. Because, of course, if we don't understand our nervous system and, like, we do happen to shut down, whether in, like, everyday life or especially during sex, or something comes up and we don't know how to talk about it, it can lead to an incredible amount of shame.
Ugh,
Um,
so
and I
much.
know
Yeah.
so much shame.
Well, that leads
Like,
to the next thing.
yes. All right.
So, I'd love to share the story of why I left theater. And then what I'd love is if you would um, overlay your experience with BDSM pre-discussion and post repair.
Yes.
And like perhaps in this example, what could have been prevented or what we could have done before and afterwards to make sure that this event was not a traumatic one.
Rock
Can,
on.
can we,
Let's do
is
it.
that okay?
Oh, yeah. This sounds great.
Okay.
Let's do it.
So I was like in my early 20s, like newly graduated Emerson College, and I was auditioning for a Shakespeare company. And one of two Shakespeare companies in town. So it was a high stakes role. It was a callback. So it was a big deal. It was for a lead role. And it was a submission dom scene in Shakespeare where the male character was very angry in the scene and was murderous, and the female character was submissive and apologetic. And um, anyone who knows Shakespeare probably knows a couple scenes that are like this. Um, and I was young, and I really wanted this audition so much. I really wanted this role so bad. So I came into it with a lot of energy. And I had also gotten a massage the day before, so my whole psyche was kind of like I had physically opened my body to this, like, so that I could be like totally open. And the during the audition, the actor, the other actor who the he was he was a reader. He was actually being considered for the lead role, so he was reading. So he was up in a way a part of the company. Took both my hands, like without permission, and slammed me to the ground. And my pages fell out of my hands, and I didn't know what was even happening at the time, but I did go into like a shutdown freeze response. And I remember feeling my stomach drop. I couldn't move, I couldn't think, and I couldn't talk. And I didn't even have my script in my hand, so I didn't know how to say the next line. Um, and I remember hearing like you immediately leave your body. So I heard the director saying, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yes." And then they were like, "Thank you," meaning thanks for the audition. Leave the room. Yeah.
What?
And I just remember walking out the door and like immediately went into a sympathetic response. I like immediately jumped out of the freeze response and went into sort of like a fight or flight response. So just started crying. And I believe the one of the directors, who is also a mentor of mine, came out to just check on me. But because I didn't know what was happening, I was like, yeah, everything's fine. Because I knew that if I said that was so fucked up, not okay, not cool, I can't believe you just let that happen in your theater, that I would never be cast in this theater company ever again. So I just ate it, and I remember just like taking the train home and crawling into my room, and it took me days to even tell my roommates about it. Um, and eventually did a bunch of self productions after that, and then I think did one more play, and then I was like, I can't. This is not for me, because theater to me was my safe zone.
Right.
Um, so like I would love to take some of the like what could we have done
Mm-hmm.
before and after to first of all have made the situation more safe from the beginning, and then if it went wrong, what would happen in sort of a reparative process at the end of like a BDSM um, interaction that would maybe bring the nervous systems back to
Yeah.
connection.
Okay. That is
Sorry if that
so
was a
fun.
lot.
No, no, no. It's like an empathetic sigh. It's like I'm with you in that story. And I'm really pissed that that happened. I'm like feeling feelings, but okay. So like I'm almost imagining. So there, like every step of the way, there were issues in the story, as like you know this better than me. But I'm almost imagining like the best metaphor that works with this in like the BDSM community is it's almost like the directors of this production, they were opening their stage to, you know, people coming in for callbacks and auditions. So it's almost like in the kink world, it's almost like these people are hosting like a play party. They're hosting and maybe they're opening their home for these people to come in and like have, you know, wonderful sexual experiences, right? And so first of all, it's on them as the hosts and as the people in the position of power to set expectations. Like I think in your story to me, and again, I'm an outsider, so this is just what it sounds like, they're just as culpable as the actor in terms of setting really clear expectations for what's okay and what's not. Um, and you were saying earlier how like you go with your impulse is maybe a strong line in theater world, like, oh, go with the moment, let's see what happens, we don't know. And maybe that's really overrated, you know, especially in this context. So I think really up to them, especially when it comes to any sort of physical stuff. I mean, our whole culture seems to be moving in this direction. Consent, what is okay, what's not okay. So setting those clear expectations would be a first step. Ideally, in that situation, the actor would abide by those. Um, or talk with you. I don't know if y'all had the chance to like talk, but did you all have the chance to talk before the scene,
Not
set
at
some
all.
anything?
Not at all. Walked right on stage, right into the scene.
Now,
Yeah.
see, like in that case, especially like you described this character, his character as being in like almost like a murderous rage. It just seems like it would benefit the scene as an entirety to have a hot second to like post brief about like what that could look like between the two of you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, as you'll notice, everything I'm saying is communication, right? Like set expectations, have communication before. Obviously, if you haven't, don't fucking, sorry for my language, but like don't grab someone by the wrists and throw them to the ground. Anyway, who
Right.
knows? Like so many people I know have experienced like real trauma. Like, of course that could trigger a response. Oh my God.
Well, especially if you're not ready for it. And I mean, in theater, I mean, that's even any actor would be like, that's messed up. This is such an extreme example because
Right.
it's not subtle, because any actor would be like, you need to have a stage combat conversation beforehand. But I was just
Exactly.
thinking about like the idea of like if you walked into an audition and they gave you your reader, sometimes you just have a reader who's reading the lines, and sometimes it's an actor.
Sure.
In this case, it was an actor who's acting it out, who also wanted the
Sure.
role. It would be amazing if we as auditionees were knew what his boundaries were, and then he could read yours before you do the scene. Here's
That's
what's
right.
possible for me in this auditioning
Right.
play.
And with that container, because if you had said in your written boundary thing, like, I'm okay with such and such physical contact, it's exactly what we were saying before. Perhaps y'all could have engaged in something physical, both of you knowing it was within the parameters of your comfort level, e.g., like your container, and had a very powerful scene. that would have felt so cathartic and good. Like, you know what I mean? Like that could have easily been an outcome here had that happened, had that pre-negotiation been part of it. Right. Oh God. And then, moving through the story again, I mean, so you clear like your response, and I'm like really empathizing with not only the fact that you had the response, but then the sort of like fawning part of it. Like, oh, I'm fine, I'm good. Like I have been in that case in sexual situations where I was thrust into kind of a shutdown response. And it's almost like an out of body thing where you're saying it's okay, even though a huge part of you is somewhere else. That fucking sucks. And I've been there too. And I think in that moment, it's all the nervous system stuff. It's like, how do you bring it back down? So obviously the director who clearly sensed that something was wrong, by this point, it's just so messy and wrong. It's like, I mean, he should have done more. I mean, God, and like sat with you and created an environment where you could just like sit and process and let that energy leave your body. Right. I mean, by this point, the story is so messed up on so many levels that I don't even know what
I think that it would have even been more validating if and the other traumatic part was they gave him the role.
Right. Which is like, are you fucking kidding me?
Yeah. Yeah.
Do we even know if he experienced any
No. I know for a fact he didn't.
That is so messed up.
So yeah, I think and like in the like what the quote I read you about like the repair piece after like a BDSM experience. It would have been inconvenient for them because what we would need to do is to stop help me pick up my pages.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe come over like and ask me if I would like some touch or bring me back or some regulation
Mm-hmm.
and make me feel like that and reassure me that if I wanted to re-audition in a safe environment that I could re-audition. Because
Yes.
that was the other piece of this, is that I also had this feeling of I'll never I wanted the role. I wanted a shot at the role. So it was like
Right.
so many layers of disappointment and terror and yeah, like connecting with me. But I think the rush of get the next person in and the
Right.
capitalist framework of like, we don't have enough money, we don't have enough time for you and your nervous system.
Damn.
Like there's even parts of me now that are like, it doesn't work, you can't be needy, like you can't be like there's
Sure.
like parts of me that
Sure.
are still like, you can't babysit everyone. Like this is the language that's inside of me that is so wrong still.
And it's like perpetuating that shame. I mean, this is a huge thing that we talk about. And I've been very grateful to experiment or explore this recently with my current partner, is like a huge part of BDSM or true dominance, for example, is not just physical dominance, but the ability to hold and nurture a sub through these very natural nervous system responses. Like it's really common after, and this wasn't even, your story isn't even a consensual story, in a more consensual setting, even if you're experiencing flogging or having some intense breath play or like any sort of intense sexual experience, within the kink world, there is often like an expectation. It's like written into the code of kink that the sub will likely have what I said before, drop. And part of the dom's responsibility is to normalize that nervous system response and be reassuring and nurturing from beginning to end. And like there have been times with my dom where like after a really intense scene, I go into like some intense, almost like hyperventilating breathing, and maybe I cry, and that lasts for about 10 minutes. And instead of feeling shame or like what's wrong with me or I'm fucking it all up, he reassures me that this is part of the process and walks me through it. That is embedded in what it means to be a real dom, which is like language we use in the community. And folks who don't do those things or who are known for shaming folks who have those responses, they're known in the community as fake doms.
Oof,
And there
oof.
are like Google Excel sheets that exist where subs and others in the community trade this information so that they know that like that's not a safe person. And so in your case, imagine if your response had been normalized by the directors and seen as just like a completely natural nervous system
Oh
reaction.
my gosh, yeah. Because because theater creators who create spaces for theater to happen are DOMs and they need DOM training.
Right, train it to be a true, not some bullshit
Not
dom, just meaning like power hungry. Like that's not a real dom. That's a fake dom, right? Someone who's
right,
not in it to be there for the holistic experience of what it really means to take
right.
responsibility for you.
Of what happens when the container is no longer a safe one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just
That's yeah.
it's crazy to me what is not in place yet. It's
The need is so abundantly clear from this story, and I'm sure trillions of others like it.
and I do think my story is an exception. I think that was an extreme example of things going wrong. Although everyone has a horror story. Um and I have more. But I do think there's way more subtle things. You know, even if somebody like did something really subtle in a scene and said, I don't know, I wasn't expecting this. I didn't put this on my sheet because I didn't even know it existed yet. So now it's going on my sheet. But just so you know, next time we do this scene, we might have to take it a little slower and I can't have you touch my cheek. Something, you know, like,
Amazing.
yeah,
Simple.
yeah,
Those sheets and as any boundary, it's a living document, right? They ebb, they flow as you become more comfortable with this actor. Maybe then you explore different terrain, but there's room to process at every step. I think that's the important part. The
yeah,
communication, right?
right, right. Totally.
I hate that story.
I know, me too. But yeah, I had a whole music career because of it.
And it's pretty kick ass,
Yeah.
right?
But it's interesting that like that's how the psyche works. Like if it's like this play space is no longer safe, like I was like, okay, well, I guess I have to remake an entire career and an entirely different thing because now music is safe until something happens in the music realm that's not safe and then I'll move on. It's like sort of the way people like chronically move on from relationships instead of working on them. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but again, sometimes they can't be worked on because in this case, the structures in theater for women, for me, um, were not safe enough. Another thing happened that I won't even mention because it's too much. But um, the I was in the dressing room, just kind of saying like, uh, this director like touched my tassels on my corset in a way that I was just like uncomfortable with. And they were just like, well, that's the way it is. That's the way this is. And
Oh
I was
God.
like, not for me, not for my nervous system. So, yeah,
And that's like it really sucks when there's such power imbued in because like obviously theater and performance and acting, it is such, I mean, so patriarchal and like obviously women and those affected are speaking up more. But I think when I think about the kink corollary to this, maybe it's because the kink scene has always been oppressed and stigmatized, and so it's really embedded in the framework of kink is kind of like this grassroots support mechanism. Like asking for references, this is another thing that like is a huge part. Like when you're like I've done some erotic photography, and like my current dom partner is an erotic photographer, and everyone he works with always asks for references. Like, can you tell me 3 models you've worked with who would vouch for you? And even when you're looking for play partners, like, and again, there's like a whole underground network of like people trading information about, you know, assholes who played with your tassels, like that type of thing. I don't know if that exists in the theater world, like an underground support system where people are trading these stories and speaking up about them, but I'm sure there's fear of repercussion.
Yeah, and
You
I
know,
think, the Me Too movement was a little bit of that, but I think
right.
the women who fall in line and just eat it
Mm-hmm.
succeed in a very conventional, succeed in a way of like staying in the framework which exists and submitting to the abuses that happen there. And I think maybe other nervous systems are just like my nervous system had a lot of trauma, and I'm also a very sensitive human and
Yeah.
also have a low tolerance for bullshit. So so I particularly couldn't stay in, but I do think that and it was tough for me to just be like, wow, like if I could just eat it, I would benefit from the system. Like,
Oh man, I
uh
completely connect with that. Yeah, the number of times if I just like weren't so sensitive or if I didn't have these trauma responses, I could just but and that's the thing, right? Like I think like it's funny because like you're not alone in that and we're not. Like I think this more sensitivity or whatever words you want to use for it, history of trauma sensitivity is far more global than we realize. It's silenced though. So that's why these conversations really matter.
yeah. Thank you.
No, I mean, I'm really struck going into this. I didn't quite know where the overlaps would be, but having this conversation, it's really just opening my eyes to the fact that a lot of these consent and communication driven practices create safety in like any realm. I think this conversation could apply. You know, it's so important.
Yeah, I'm even thinking about things I've never thought about now, like the realm of romantic relationships and um like when someone's putting more effort in or being more dominant in their energy, or just like how power is never equal. It's like a flow, and
Right.
how many more ways that we can work to let life be crazy and messy and have a super amazing container that we can both agree on and have parameters around. Like, my mind is exploding.
I know. It's like stop romanticizing mind reading culturally, this idea that we should all just know implicitly. Like start romanticizing boundaries from the very beginning and open communication around all of it. And let's realize that doing that will actually create far more sexiness, far more safety, and far more play. Like you lose nothing
Yeah.
when you communicate about this stuff from the outset.
And
Nothing.
that's, I think, been my personal, like, I'm like, well, if I say it, it's not going to be. I've actually had a partner be like, you're ruining the sexiness by talking like about things, like, because there's this thing of like that mystery and like spontaneity. It's kind of like really irresponsible acting, like actors who don't negotiate. It's like, if something goes wrong, yeah, obviously there was
Right. You had
no.
no idea.
And I think the fact that theater works so much better, music works so much better, sexual play works so much better. Like, there's all these realms in which it's proven to that containers of safety create more of life to blossom.
Yes, there's nothing unsexy about it. Period.
Cool.
Yeah, so good. Thank you so much for this conversation. I need to like I need to like journal for like 2 hours to
Yeah.
process it all. Because yeah, it's so fun to apply this stuff across the board. I love it.
Will you one last time, will you just say
Yeah.
all the ways that people can find you online? Your Instagram is an amazing resource. Um
Oh,
so just say your Instagram and your website again, or and anything else you want us to know where people can find you.
sure. So Instagram is like great for just like daily reminders about things, all things boundaries and people pleasing. So that's at HAILEY Paige MAGEE. And then my website is where you can find information about what I offer. So I do a lot of workshops virtually. I do some group coaching programs, like 6-week group opportunities, which are so fun. All of that's on my website, HAILEYMAGEE.com. That's the good stuff.
Awesome. And for anyone with codependency or boundary issues, people pleasing, you are just so deeply enriched in all of it and have so much to give. So,
Thanks, Ruby.
yeah, you rule. Thank you
I
for
got you.
and thank you for trusting me to just like hop on a call and just have this conversation. I so just feel really honored by that. So thanks.
Ditto. I learned so much. Like, really, like, I'm having one of those moments where my mind is spinning, and like, it obviously emphasizes the importance of, there's so much overlap in our work. Having
Yeah.
this conversation, really, like everything you were talking about, like nervous system, security, window of tolerance. I'm like, yep. Like,
Yeah.
there's a lot of
Yeah.
overlap.
Well, I hope people take this conversation and think about their own lives and questions and how, because the thing is like it's a movement and everyone has to do their own thing in their own corner. And if everyone's changing the culture, it will change very quickly. So, yeah. All right. I wish my co-partner Jennie Knott could be here because she would love you. So if you're ever in Chicago, come visit. And
Ditto.
yeah. And thank you again.